Good day, good people, and welcome to Contemplative Being on the Mighty Network. It is good to be with you. If you will, let me know in the chat section that the audio and video is coming through clearly. We have made a few adjustments on my side for audio and video. Tried to create a little bit more color tones and clearer audio. Very good. Thank you all so much. And as Bo asked earlier, how is everyone? And let everyone know where you are joining from, if you will. Just type a little note in the chat section. It's good to be here. Whether you are here for the live session or watching the recording, we are so grateful for your participation. Tonight's topic is forgiveness and mercy. And of course, those are really big topics, so we can, just touch on them a little bit. Hopefully, deepen our heart connection with them so that we can live from that space. And not so much just try to learn definitions and intellectual information. During the week at 11:15 a.m. Central Time each day, you will see a post on the Mighty Network that continues this theme of forgiveness and mercy. So you're invited to take those in, interact with them, interact with each other, leave your comments, even leave your questions if you have any. Maybe you want to share an experience. That would be great. We'd love to hear from you in any way you'd like to share. We'd like to invite you now to take a few minutes just to center down, as Howard Thurman says. Let us come to a place of presence in our heart and mind. We can do so just by gently closing our eyes and focusing on our breath, just watching its natural rhythm in and out. Letting each inhale be a reception of the divine, and each exhale of letting go of something that doesn't serve us in this moment. Letting go of the busyness of the day, of the planning of tomorrow, even letting go of those ego ideas of who we think we are, and let us just be who we are in God. And let's commit to doing that for just a few minutes together in silence. So now just take a gentle deep breath and let it out slowly. Do what you can to remain in that heart space and to listen from there. Before I actually get into the heart of our reflections tonight, I wanted to offer you a little bit of a preface about what is mercy and what is forgiveness, just to give you a little bit of foundation behind what is being shared tonight. Because mercy is the unearned, unconditional flow of love that meets human weakness without judgment. It is not given in response to worthiness, but arises as the steady pulse of compassion that sustains life itself. Mercy is the ground of divine generosity, a presence that opens space for renewal even in the midst of failure. Forgiveness is the human response to this mercy, the act of releasing resentment and loosening the grip of injury. It does not erase harm or deny truth, but allows wounds to be carried differently, transformed into openings for compassion. Forgiveness frees both the offended and the offender from cycles of retaliation, creating the possibility of restored relationship and inner freedom. And we might be able to say that the difference lies in their movement. Mercy flows outward as the source, unconditioned and steadfast, while forgiveness is the practice of receiving that mercy and extending it through human choice and surrender. Mercy reveals love's constancy. Forgiveness embodies that love in lived relationship. So I hope that that is helpful as we go through the evening. Let me start with mercy appears not as a distant idea. It is the pulse of being itself. It's steady and unyielding. And it does not wait for conditions, nor does it hinge on merit. In the luminous quiet of attention, it can be perceived as a force that meets the clutching heart without judgment, offering a hand to release what is held too tightly. This is not a simple act. It is not a transactional exchange either. It is the essence of existence revealing itself through surrender. The moment when the mind's habitual grasping relaxes and the soul can rest in that vast, unbroken current of love that does not demand repayment. In the Hebrew, Hesed, the steadfast conventional love, flows like a river through every choice, every glance, every small opening in the armor of the self. Forgiveness is the ground where humility and freedom meet. To withhold it often, to withhold it is often to clutch at a fragile claim to righteousness, to insist upon power where vulnerability is required. And we do seem to like to clutch on and withhold forgiveness. Now, the contemplative eye sees how subtle and pervasive this clinging can be, and how it colors perception, framing others as obstacles rather than compassions in shared imperfection. In stillness, the habitual narratives of superiority dissolve, and it becomes clear that mercy is not earned. It is given, received, and then allowed to extend itself as naturally as the heart beats. To dwell in mercy is to witness the paradox of powerlessness and love intertwined. The one who forgives is not diminished, but becomes a conduit for the same grace that freed them. Regrets and failures lose their authority when met with the firm yet gentle presence of unmerited kindness. Life unfolds with all its contradictions, joy and sorrow, hurt and relief, without needing to be reshaped to satisfy the ego. And in such a space, the act of forgiving becomes inseparable from the act of being present. Friends, mercy moves through the contemplative soul until it radiates outward, transforming ordinary gestures into channels for compassion and reconciliation. And in that space, in that quiet acknowledgement of what is, the heart learns the rhythm of giving and receiving without a ledger, the freedom of surrender, and the deep, deep abiding joy that comes when the self no longer defines the measure of grace. Thus, we might say that being fully present and open is what allows mercy and forgiveness to flow through life, renewing both the self and the connections we share with others. Thus, also means that contemplative practice becomes foundational. We pause for just a minute to give you a reminder that if anything is coming up for you at all and you want to share in the chat section, please do. It doesn't matter what it is. If you want to use it to take a note or share a thought or ask a question or echo something you heard, let's do that. It is a way we can support each other, sharing what's coming up for us. Now, forgiveness itself is not a transaction, nor is it a measure of virtue. Forgiveness is the quiet breaking open of the heart into the vastness of mercy. It arises not from effort or willpower, but from the unearned gift of grace moving through human weakness. So to encounter forgiveness in its truth is to be disarmed of illusions of merit, freed from the tight grip of needing to be right, deserving, or justified. And something larger than the self moves into the space where grievance once reigned, and what seemed impossible begins to breathe again. Breathe. This moment is not swift or predictable. It's not a matter of learning the right technique so that you can produce instant results. Often it comes through the ashes of waiting, when wounds remain tender and the will to forgive feels absent. And in those seasons, the call is not to force resolution, but to rest in the rawness of poverty, to allow longing itself to become prayer. And in that kind of stillness, the soul learns to thirst rightly, to lean into the mystery of a love that asks nothing in return. To forgive is not to erase what happened, right? To forgive is not to forget. To forgive is to allow reality to stand in its fullness without needing to fracture it into enemy and victim, guilty and innocent. Forgiveness restores the dignity of all involved, even when reconciliation is incomplete. It is less a human achievement than a surrender into a logic not of this world, the illogic of love. Put that in the chat section, the illogic of love, where the calculus of offense and repayment dissolves. And within this way of being, freedom quietly emerges. Within this way of being, freedom quietly emerges. Hearts that are bound by resentment are released. Communities once fractured become places where forgiveness circulates as freely as breath. Take a breath now. And without this circulation, life collapses back into cycles of retaliation and defense and retaliation. With it, the possibility of communion appears. To live in forgiveness is to stand in the flow of grace that renews all things. To live in forgiveness is to stand in the flow of grace that renews all things. It is to dwell in the luminous ground where mercy is not an occasional act, but the very air breathed together. And in this, action springs from stillness, and peace no longer depends on conditions being met. In this space, the human heart becomes a vessel through which divine freedom enters the world. Talking about your heart, shaping a community not of perfection, but of mercy made visible. We may be able to take away from this, forgiveness is not an achievement, but a grace-filled surrender that frees hearts, renews community, and allows mercy to flow as the ground of true peace. Friends, forgiveness is not a dismissal of pain, nor a quiet erasure of what wounds the heart. Forgiveness is the work of opening to love fierce enough to hold grief and anger without being consumed by them. So, in a sense, in a more direct sense, forgiveness is more about, when we forgive someone, it's more about releasing what we carry, not what the offender did. Now, the injury remains inscribed in the memory of flesh and spirit, yet forgiveness changes its weight. Trying to create a pace here that's leaving space for this to kind of settle into the space between the cells in your body, because the injury remains inscribed in the memory of flesh and spirit, but forgiveness changes its weight. Instead of crushing the one who has suffered, the wound actually becomes a channel for compassion. And it's a place where mercy enters and reshapes the world. don't hear this wrong, this is not indulgence of weakness. It is the strength to refuse hatred's demand for annihilation. To forgive is to recognize that evil's power is not final and that those who have been captured by it are not beyond transformation. And that kind of recognition does not deny harm. It names it clearly and allows the wrong to be seen without collapsing into vengeance. And justice and mercy are not opposites. In this case, they are companions. Justice insists on truth, and mercy refuses to let the story end with destruction. Together, they mark a path toward healing that is neither passive nor naive. They are rooted in a divine love that holds both victim and offender within its vast embrace. And friends, in the presence of that kind of love, hatred reveals its futility. It promises release but multiplies chains, binding the wounded in endless repetition of harm. Forgiveness severs that repetition, not by forgetting. It severs that repetition by allowing the wound to become transparent to a deeper power. The pain is not silenced but carried differently, transformed into a witness for compassion, into a strength that can stand with the brokenness of the world without succumbing to despair. Without succumbing to despair. This work rarely unfolds in grand gestures. It begins close in, among those whom life is most entangled. Family, neighbors, communities of struggle and care. It is the laborious work of love. And in this space, forgiveness is no strategy of avoidance, but a way of inhabiting reality without defense, without the compulsion to strike back or retreat. It is the quiet refusal to let the heart be defined by violation, the quiet refusal to be defined by violation. And then it becomes the steady offering of space where even the betrayer may return to their truest self. Perhaps we can take away that forgiveness is the courageous practice of transforming pain into compassion, the courageous practice of breaking cycles of harm and opening space for healing and renewal in community. I feel like this would be a good place to pause and let your heart space reground and recenter, to rest in this illogic of love for a few minutes as we be together and breathe together in the silence. You're invited again to take a gentle, deep breath. Slowly exhale. Place your hand on your heart if that helps you, just to be present, to recognize that you are here in body, mind, heart, and spirit. Again, feel free to share in the chat at any time. I know that this particular topic can feel a bit heavy sometimes. We are all here with each other, being present to each other, supporting each other. Friends, forgiveness is not a sentiment to be reached quickly or easily. It really is a path that's walked slowly, and we walk it often with faltering steps, because our heart seems to resist release even when our lips speak words of pardon. You may have experienced this, especially with young kids, and something happens and quickly they say, "I'm sorry," as though that would release them from everything. And it is not a denial of suffering. It's really the revelation of love, the revelation of love that remains unbroken. And these words open a way of being that is not bound by the cycles of retaliation or the logic of retribution. They really do invite a humanity shaped by mercy, a humanity that dares to live as if reconciliation is not only possible, but necessary for life itself to flourish. To forgive is to live beyond the tight grip of bitterness. Forgiveness does not erase wounds, nor pretend that harm was never done. Forgiveness gathers the rawness of pain into the presence of God and allows the breath of compassion to pass through what is fractured. So forgiveness is not the abandonment of justice. Forgiveness is the refusal to become possessed by hatred. And it is the recognition that no person is defined forever by their worst act. And no one is beyond the reach of God's mercy. When we practice contemplation, in the stillness of contemplation, forgiveness reveals itself not as an achievement, it is an opening. When the heart loosens its grasp on resentment, even for a moment, something much wider than the self is glimpsed. And this awareness does not exclude suffering, but holds it within a larger field where enmity loses its permanence. The struggle to forgive again and again is not failure, but practice. It's an apprenticeship in freedom. I really like that phrase, an apprenticeship in freedom. Can be another good chat note. To live in forgiveness is to begin again continually. To meet others not as enemies to be defeated, but as companions in the difficult journey of becoming whole. New memories may be formed, new doors may open, and life can be shared as gift rather than withheld in suspicion. And in this way, forgiveness becomes not only God's greatest gift, but also humanity's clearest likeness to the divine. So from this, perhaps we can take away forgiveness is a continual practice of releasing resentment, opening the heart to mercy, and living in a way that reflects divine love in human relationships. Albeit, violence carries its own momentum. It multiplies, intensifies, and binds communities to cycles that feel endless, drawing both victim and aggressor into its orbit. The instinct to retaliate appears natural, yet beneath it lies a deeper hunger, an ache for restoration that punishment alone can never fulfill. And where retaliation closes the circle, grace opens it. Friends, grace interrupts, disarms, and reframes what justice can mean. It refuses to reduce human beings to the worst of their choices and dares to believe that healing can extend across the divides that once seemed permanent. And to embody this way of seeing is not to deny the reality of harm. Wombs cry out for acknowledgement, and justice without accountability turns fragile and hollow. But accountability is not the same as vengeance. Restorative justice insists on truth-telling, on facing the harm fully, while at the same time refusing to seal identity with the stamp of transgression. It creates the conditions where victims are seen and heard, and where the perpetrators are not cast away, but invited into the arduous work of transformation. This path is demanding. It requires faith in the possibility that people can awaken to lives beyond their failures, and courage to release the false security of retribution. It requires a vision wide enough to hold both the suffering of victims and the humanity of those who cause suffering. It asks communities to live not in the order of destruction, but in the order of God's reign, where forgiveness is not sentimentality. Forgiveness is the very structure of life renewed. And contemplation nurtures this vision. In stillness, the drive to label, to divide, to demand repayment begins to loosen. And a wider awareness unfolds. An awareness that's not bound by the compulsions of fear and retribution. And from this ground, forgiveness becomes more than a moral choice. It arises as clarity. It is the recognition that love, though costly, is stronger than death. And in choosing forgiveness, communities do not erase pain, but they resist allowing pain to dictate destiny. They choose life. They choose a justice that restores. I hope you take away from this that choosing forgiveness over retribution opens the way for healing, transformation, and a deeper justice that's rooted in love. And in this illogic of love, what we're saying is forgiveness is the unveiling of a truth that logic cannot contain. It interrupts the endless cycles of exchange and repayment, thus overturning the brittle scaffolding of merit and worthiness. In its presence, human hearts encounter the mystery of a love that refuses calculation. I don't know how that sounds, but it really feels like a good line to say. The mystery of a love that refuses calculation. You see, here goodness is not earned. It's revealed, flowing like a hidden current that carries both the one who releases and the one who receives. To forgive is to step outside the confines of judgment and punishment into a spaciousness that holds both the wound and the healing without contradiction. Sounds like non-dual contemplative awareness, does it not? And friends, this way of living does not erase what has been broken. it just simply it transforms it into a ground where new life emerges. I believe this may be an overlooked lesson of the crucified and risen Christ that we talk about in Christianity. The crucified and risen Christ embodies this reversal, where betrayal, cruelty, and death are not erased, but drawn into the possibility of redemption. Such a stance is neither passive nor naive. It is the most radical freedom. And it insists that even the deepest fault is not the final word. That sounds like freedom to me. And in this movement, the mistakes of the past become material for creating a future that is not shackled to vengeance. Friends, contemplative presence allows the taste of this freedom. In the stillness, the compulsion to cling to grievance loosens. The incessant rehearsals of wrong fade into silence. As it was said earlier, it becomes a form of self-emptying. When the mind no longer divides reality into winners and losers, worthy and unworthy, the heart begins to soften into mercy. Forgiveness arises then not as an effort of will, but as a flowering of shared belonging. It cannot be forced. It can be made ready by the willingness to see without defense, to allow the other to be more than the sum of their failings. And in this way, forgiveness becomes more than a moral act. It becomes the very atmosphere of divine life breathed into human experience. Those who surrender to it are not diminished. They are made indestructible because their strength no longer rests on the control. Their strength rests on communion. Friends, mercy is not an exception to the rules. It is the revelation that love was always and is always the only rule worth keeping. And forgiveness is the threshold where divine generosity and human frailty meet, shaping a future no longer bound by retribution but opened by grace. Forgiveness then transforms wounds into a source of new life. It is a type of death and resurrection. We die to an old way of living and we rise into a new life. A new life that reveals that love, not judgment, is the deepest ground of freedom. As I said, friends, contemplative or presence allows the taste of this freedom. And in the silence, our compulsion to cling to grievances loosens, and our incessant rehearsals of wrong fade into silence. So let us enter into that space and practice together. Take a gentle deep breath again. The invitation extends again to anyone that would like to share anything in the chat section at all before we close with a brief blessing. Really, anything at all you'd like to share in the chat. Comments, reflections, questions. Maybe you just want to say hi. That's quite fine. We're happy to hear from you. I am grateful whether you are here for the live session or watching the recording, and I certainly hope you will invite your friends to join us sometime and let them take us for a test drive if that's what they need. I see we have a couple of people typing, so I'll pause for just a minute before I share my final word. We're very glad that you were present too, Ida. Thank you so much for your presence. Friends, may your hearts dwell in mercy, receiving and extending it without calculation, allowing the quiet power of forgiveness to reshape your being. May wounds, whether yours or others, become channels for compassion, and may the courage to forgive open spaces where love and justice meet. May each act of surrender, each moment of presence, draw you and your communities into a freedom that transforms pain into life and fear into grace. I hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful evening. Blessings to all. Good night.